Luke chapter 12. Last week we finished up chapter 11 and we started into chapter 12 and got about halfway through. Tonight we're going to finish chapter 12 and we're just going to sneak into chapter 13 a little bit. If you remember last week, Jesus gave us examples of what a hypocrite would look like, an actor, people putting on a mask, living on the outside different than what was on the inside, but not fooling anyone. And that was in chapter 11, verses 29 through 54. Then Jesus warned his followers about hypocrisy. And that's what started chapter 12, and it went through the first 12 verses. Then he warned his followers about being greedy and covetousness. And that was in verses 13 through 21. And then he finished up his warnings about worry that we closed on in verses 22 through 34. Tonight we're going to finish what Jesus tells his followers in chapter 12, and that is to stay diligent. To stay diligent. So let's begin with verse 35 where we left off last time. Jesus says, "You must keep your belts fastened and your lamps burning. Be like people who are waiting for their master to return from a wedding. As soon as he arrives and knocks, they will open the door for him." If you remember the wedding ceremony that we have talked about on multiple occasions for the Jews, it's a lot different than ours. They would propose, they would have a big ceremony, much like the Last Supper. And if you were there in our John study, we talked about that the Last Supper, as much as it was Passover, it was also Jesus proposing to the church. But you have that situation, then the groom goes away, he leaves gifts for his bride, goes and works at his father's home until the house is ready. Then he returns at an indiscriminate time, usually around a year, but he leaves, and then once his father says to go pick up your bride, they make big fanfare. He gathers all of his friends. They march down the city shouting and singing and making a huge racket, often at night. And then they would come to who will be the bride, and they pick her up in a chair, and they let her lift her off the ground. They rapture her up, as it were, and carry her to the wedding. And this is the picture that Jesus is giving. You need to be ready because you don't know when the groom's going to show back up. And he's talking about the church here. Well, if that's the case, we need to be ready, church, for when he is to return. And we don't know when that will be, so we need to keep our belts fastened. The older I get and the fatter I get, the more important that is. John and I went working the other day, and we were putting some plumbing in a house, and I had to stand up on a chair, and as I'm standing there, my pants keep going down. I was thinking, man, I wish I had brought my belt, so I'm having to hike them up, right? Well, I wasn't prepared. I should have been. Left the house without it. We need to keep our belts fastened, and we also need to keep the lights on. What is that, Super 8, right? We'll keep the light on for you. Well, be prepared. Super 8, what? Super 6, yeah, right? We'll keep the lights on for you. You show up, we're ready to open the doors. Well, Jesus says, be the same for me. Verse 37, how blessed are those servants whom the master finds watching for him when he comes. I tell all of you with certainty, he himself will put on an apron and make them sit down at the table and go around and serve them. Doesn't this seem a bit odd? Let's read the verse again because it's exactly backwards. How blessed are those servants whom the master finds watching for him when he comes. I tell you all with certainty, he himself, who's he referring to? The master, will put on an apron, make them sit down at a table, and go around and serve them. That's odd. But there's a couple things I want you to draw from this. Think about it. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He's been in ministry for 3 years with his disciples. The Last Supper has not happened yet. But what did Jesus do at the Last Supper? He wrapped a towel around his waist. He went around to each one and he washed their feet. Jesus is telling you, I'm telling you with certainty, this is what the Master's going to do. And what did Peter do? No, not me, Lord. You can't wash my feet. And Jesus says, if I don't, you can have no part of me. Then Peter changes his tune. Then, Lord, wash all of me. Let's go head to toe. Get every nook and cranny. But think about this. He's not just talking about what he's going to do at the Last Supper. He's talking about the rapture of the church and the wedding. One of these days, we're going to be like Peter, but we'd sure better learn from him and keep our mouths shut. Because we get to the marriage supper of the Lamb, and the Master's going to put an apron on, and he's going to go around, and he's going to serve the guests. Make sure, future reference, all right, when this happens, don't be Peter and say, no, don't wash my feet, Jesus. Because then he'll say, you don't have any part of me then. Right? Now, he probably can't say that because by then we'll be in heaven and all, I think you understand what I'm saying, though. This is yet to come, even though it was yet to come for them. It's yet to come for us as well. Wow. Seems backwards. Verse 38. How blessed they will be, if their master comes in the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them awake. But be sure of this. If the homeowner had known at what time the thief was coming, he would have watched and would have, he would have watched and would have not let his house be broken into. Who's the homeowner that he's talking about here? It's really confusing if you go to the King James. Because the King James, we don't get that English anymore. It says the good man of the house. But this is Jesus referring to Satan. Jesus is talking about the rapture of the church, and he's referring to Satan, the homeowner. In Luke chapter 11, Jesus said, the strong man, right, he guards the walls, and he protects all of his things until a stronger man comes in and binds him and plunders his house. Jesus was talking about Satan then too. What Jesus is talking about, Satan is named what? The prince of the power of the air, right? And he's also named the prince of this world. This is Satan's home for a little while. Not too awful long. And what he's done is he has trapped all humanity in their sin. And he's doing his best to keep us there. But one of these days, Jesus is going to split through those skies, and Satan and all of his minions won't be able to hold our feet to the floor. And Christ is going to pull us all out. Notice he said, if we change it from homeowner to Satan, if Satan had knew what time the thief were coming, he would have watched and would not have let his house be broken into. The reason we don't know when the rapture is going to take place is so that Satan doesn't know when the rapture is going to take place, and it's going to catch him by surprise too. He knows the day is coming. He fears it greatly, because when Jesus comes to rapture, he knows his time is very near. There will be a day when our feet's going to leave this earth, and Satan and all of his minions won't be able to hold on to us for an inch. Verse 40. So be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at a time when you don't expect. Be ready. My dad's, when I was a kid, he used to do this all the time. And I think I might have done it once here, maybe twice. So, by raised hand, how many of you believe that Jesus is going to come in the next 50 years? Raise your hand for a rapture. All right? Keep them up if you think Jesus will come in the next 30 years. Okay? What about the next 10 years? 5? Okay, the hands keep coming down. 1? How many of you think he will come in the next 6 months?
I'm looking for him.
Yeah, I'm looking for him, amen. How about next week? Jesus will come by next week. You believe it? What about today? How many of you believe Jesus is coming to rapture us today? Raised hands. The verse says, so be ready because the Son of Man is coming at a time when you don't expect him. When do we not expect him? Right now. How are we supposed to be prepared for his coming? To be ready for him to show up at the door today. I waffle. I am not convinced either way of pre-trib or mid-trib. I'm somewhere there. I can't make up my mind. It's kind of like what we were talking about with the Temple Mount and where the location of the temple is. Every time I study one, oh yes, this is good, and oh yes, I don't know. But you know what I do know? I want to live each second of my life ready for when he does come. Because if he comes today, or he comes somewhere in the middle of that 7 years, that 3.5 years, I want to be ready to go. I don't want to hold 1 second on this freight train. Now you're going to have to excuse me for this illustration, but do you all know the most interesting man in the world? The commercials. What beer is that? Is it Dos Equis? Yeah. And he says, "Stay thirsty, my friends," with the froggy throat. You know. Well, I'm not going to tell you to stay thirsty, but I will tell you this: stay ready, my friends. Stay ready, my friends. All right, stay ready. Verse 41. Peter asked, Lord, are you telling this parable just for us or for everyone? I love Jesus' answer. Yes and no. He doesn't give him a yes or a no, but he gives him both and. He doesn't say, yes, Peter, this is for you, and he doesn't say, yes, this is for everyone, because who he's referring to is everyone serving God so that they will be ready when he's here. Because we don't know when our time is, do we? Whether he comes in the clouds and we meet him in the air, or whether he comes and takes us by the hand and we cross over the river of death. We don't know when that is. So the only thing we can do is be ready for this moment. Live our life in such a way that we're ready for this moment. Verse 42, the Lord said, who then is the faithful and careful servant manager, whom his master will put in charge of giving all of his other servants their share of the food at the right time? How blessed is that servant whom his master finds doing this when he comes. I tell you with certainty, he will put him in charge of all of his property. Now, I'm not exactly sure, but I think this could be a reference Jesus referring back or using Joseph as an illustration. How Joseph was put in charge over Potiphar's home. But you can take that for what you will. You can do your own study. Verse 45, but if that servant says to himself, my master is taking a long time to come back, and begins to beat the other servants and eat and drink and get drunk, the master of the servant will come on a day when he doesn't expect him, and at an hour when he doesn't know. Then this master will punish him severely, and get this, assign him a place with the unfaithful people. And that is such a mild way of putting it. The word here is apistos, and it's the word that we use for apostasy, or an apostate. An evil unbeliever. He says that servant, when he shows back up and he's not doing his work and he's not doing what he's supposed to be, he's going to be assigned the same place as the apostates. That's bold. And by the way, do you know where that place that's assigned for them is? Revelation chapter 21 verse 8. John says this, but the fearful, the unbelieving, same thing here, the unfaithful people, the apostates, the abominable, the murderers, and the whoremongers, the sorcerers, the idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Don't be there, y'all. Don't be just hearers of the word, be doers of the word. And be doers till he comes. Verse 47. That servant who knew what his master wanted but didn't prepare himself or do what he wanted will receive a severe beating. But the servant who did these things that deserved a beating without knowing it will receive a light beating. Much will be required from everyone to whom much has been given, but even more will be demanded from the one to whom much has been entrusted. Just like in heaven, there are levels, there will be levels in hell as well. And if you knew a lot and didn't do it, the more punishment you receive. Of course, Satan and his minions will get the worst of the punishment, the worst of torment for eternity. But this is a scary verse, or at least it should be. And I know I've quote this all the time, but when Billy Graham was asked if will God judge America, his response was, if God doesn't soon bring judgment upon America, he'll have to go back and apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Because in our nation, we have been given much. We have been given much freedom with much of a background to understand and know God. At one time, there were churches that were filled on every street corner. And maybe that was because we didn't have any other place to bide our time, whatever it wants to be. We still had our ears open to hear the word, and we are judged according to it. Unfortunately, just as much as we talk corporately about our nation, this verse is actually talking about the individual. And who he's individually talking about is you and me. Because you and I have been entrusted with immense blessings. What have we done with them? What are we doing with them? If we're supposed to be working and we're supposed to be doing until he comes, as he's mentioned in these last 15 verses, what have we been doing with the light that we have received? And what are we doing right now? Because if we're to be ready for right now when he comes back, and we're not doing anything with it, we've just read what happens to the people that he finds being lazy when he gets here. Ouch. God help us. God forgive us for the many times we've had the white knuckles on the back of the pew saying, God, I don't want to do it right now, but I'll do it later. Jesus says, I've come to set the earth on fire, and how I wish it were already ablaze. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and what stress I am under until it's completed. Remember, he's already set his jaw. He's already heading towards Jerusalem. He is heading to the finish line. And nothing is going to deter him. What baptism is Jesus talking about? He's talking about his own death. He's talking about literally what we do figuratively. He's talking about going all the way. But do you remember, what did John the Baptist say about Jesus' baptism? Remember? He said, I indeed baptize you with water, but one comes after me who will what? Baptize with the Holy Spirit and fire. Jesus isn't just talking about his death in verse 50. Look at verse 49. What does he say? I come to set the earth on fire. John the Baptist said, he's coming to baptize with fire. John chapter 14. It's after the Last Supper. Jesus and his disciples are meandering in the cool April evening, and they're on their way to the Garden of Gethsemane where he's going to sweat drops of blood. Instead of the disciples encouraging Jesus, he's there encouraging them. He's under a great amount of stress at this point. On his way there, he's telling them why he has to go away. Do you remember what he said? Because I want to leave you a comforter. Jesus here in verse 50 says, I have a baptism to be baptized with, and what stress I am under until it's completed. He's set his jaw, he's burning, he's going down so that we can be caught aflame. That the Holy Spirit's consuming fire might engulf us all. And the only way for that to happen is if he dies. So then Jesus says, verse 51, do you think that I came to bring peace on the earth? Not at all. I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 people in one household will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law. Well, that always happens. And daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Jesus didn't come for peace. Now, wait a minute, though. What did the angels sing the night of his birth? Luke chapter 2. Peace on earth. Goodwill to men. Did you know that's actually another spot where the King James gets it wrong? Other translations have since fixed it. But the wording isn't just on the world. It's to whom his favor rests. You see, peace doesn't come with Jesus if you're not walking with Jesus. In fact, the next time he shows up, if you're not in the air with him, you don't want to be here if you're a Gentile. You don't want to be in that army. Here, this is the idea. Jesus came to bring peace to us. But that doesn't happen unless you accept him. Because there is no peace if you don't have the Prince of Peace. Verse 54. Then Jesus told the crowds, when you see a cloud coming from the west, you immediately say there is going to be a storm. And that's what happens. When you see a south wind blowing, you say it's going to be hot. And so it is. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky, yet you don't know how to interpret the present time? Why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? Have you not noticed as we have gone through the book of Luke, now the closer Jesus gets to Jerusalem, the more severe his reprimands? Because he's running out of time. There's only so much longer that everybody's going to be willing to even listen. And so now he's like, you guys see it. You see the clouds coming. See. West, that way. That's east. This is west. You see the clouds coming. You know it's going to be rain. South, you know from the winds from the desert, it's going to be a hot day. But you don't see the Prince of Peace right before you. But he didn't just say that. Notice what he said, you hypocrites. Remember what he talked about last week? A hypocrite is someone that's putting on a mask. They're scared of what everybody else says, so they're going to act this way even though on the inside there's something different? What Jesus is saying here, you see the clouds, you interpret the weather, and that's what happens. You don't see me coming, you're liars. They had seen his miracles. They had seen how he taught. They knew that it was truth, like what Nicodemus said. But they said, oh no, he's getting his power from Satan. It's from Beelzebub. You're a bunch of liars. You know the truth, but you refuse to obey it. No wonder they wanted to kill him. I mean, he's calling them right out. Verse 58. For example, when you go with your opponent in front of a ruler, do your best to settle with him on the way there. Otherwise, you'll be dragged in front of the judge, and the judge will hand you over to an officer, and the officer will throw you in prison, and I tell you, you will never get out of there until you've paid the last penny. Back then, they had debtors' prisons. I don't know how that even made sense. You're too broke to pay a bill, so they're going to throw you in prison until you can pay the bill. How are you going to pay the bill when you're in prison, right? Well, that's the idea. Now into chapter 13. We're only going to go a few verses into chapter 13. At that time, some of the people who were there told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate mixed with their sacrifices. Pilate was a great guy. He really cared a lot about how they worshiped. So much so that he went and took money from the temple treasury to pay for an aqueduct against their will. Now, if you've been with us on our Friday nights, actually about 2 weeks ago we talked about them, and there are some of the pieces of the aqueduct. Imprinted on top is the Roman seal that lets you know that they were the ones that built it. It went from Bethlehem down to the Temple Mount that fed the Temple Mount with water, whatever. So Pilate steals the money from the treasury, builds this aqueduct. Needless to say, the religious people didn't like this. So they go and they start not necessarily a riot, but they're protesting. They're unarmed. So Pilate, to keep them quiet, to squelch the somewhat of a rebellion, he sends his soldiers in dressed in normal garb, hidden with weapons. And as the people are shouting and decrying what Pilate's done, he has his men go in and kill them all. And he kills most of them unarmed. Just murders them right there. What they're trying to do is they're like, well, Jesus, what are we going to do about this? I mean, Pilate can't do this. Do you not stand with your own people? Decry Pilate. Or if Jesus would have said, Pilate did the right thing, they shouldn't have been protesting, then they'd have had all the Jews against him. This is between a rock and a hard place. This is a yes or no. Are you going to be a Republican or a Democrat type deal? Right? So instead of answering that question and pigeonholing him, Jesus gives them a much deeper problem that they should be worried about. So he asks them a question. He says, verse 2, do you think that these Galileans were more sinful than all of the other Galileans because they suffered like this? Absolutely not. I tell you, but if you don't repent, then you too will all die. What about the 18 people who were killed when the Tower of Siloam fell on them? Do you think that they were worse offenders than other people living in Jerusalem? Absolutely not. I tell you, but if you don't repent, then you too will all die. This is the same lie that even permeates the church today. Bad things happen to who? Right? Bad people. Right. Bad things aren't supposed to happen to good people. That's not true. We live in a fallen, broken world. Bad things happen all the time. And it doesn't matter how good you are. All of us at one point or another, we end up getting sick. Even after we take all of our vitamins. Right? We live in a broken, sinful world, and just because you're good doesn't mean you're going to have an easy life. Bad things still happen. Sonia, Gary, and I, we've lost 3 pastors of our freshman year of college. They were in our class. They all had young families. They were all in the pastorate. One died of brain cancer. One died of a car wreck. Another one died of a heart attack. All of them suddenly. All of them were the families. Titus with his brain cancer, his family was able to say goodbye, but the other 2 certainly weren't. Bad things still happen, even when you're doing the right things. Another one, some of you know Amy Marks, the one that brings eggs on Wednesday night. She'll probably be here this evening. Her best friend, married to a guy that was going to be a pastor. He was in our class as well. They were driving down the road, person at night, person in front of him swerves, and all he sees is oncoming lights of a drunk that hit him, killed his wife of 1 year and pregnant at that. Killed them both. He's still alive, but his wife and baby are gone. Bad things still happen. I wish I had answers of why, but I don't. The bigger question that Jesus raises is not why do bad things happen to good people, but if they do happen, are you ready for them? The bigger question is, have you repented? If something were to happen to you immediately, would you be ready for eternity? This is very timely for the people that Jesus is speaking to. 38 years from this question, Rome would come into Jerusalem and kill indiscriminately 1 million people, man, woman, and child alike. Whether they realized it or not, the people that are asking Jesus this question are living on borrowed time. And Jesus says, don't worry if bad things are going to happen. Worry when they do, are you ready? Because they weren't. History tells us. Now he goes on to tell them specifically a parable about themselves. Here, by the way, this is a terraced garden, terraced farm outside of Jerusalem. You can see the stepped fences where they do this. This just gives you a mental picture. The one right there in front of you that looks like that one's a vineyard, and you can see the tower that would protect it along with the stone fencing around. So this kind of gives you an image of what Jesus is referring to. Then Jesus told them this parable. A man had a fig tree that had been planted in his vineyard. He went to look for fruit on it, but he didn't find any. So he told the gardener, look, here, for 3 years I've been coming to look for fruit on this tree, but I haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should we waste the soil? But the gardener replied, sir, leave it alone for 1 more year until I dig around it and fertilize it. Maybe next year it will bear fruit. Jesus was speaking of this parable specifically to them. We can take application from it, but Jesus is smacking them in the face with this. His ministry was 3.5 years. He's on his way to Jerusalem. The 3 years is up. He literally mentions 3 years. He's been looking for fruit on the tree of Israel, and he hasn't found any. Logic says just cut the thing down, toss out the roots, don't waste the soil, plant something else. But the gardener says, no, let's wait for just 1 more year. Let's give it just a little bit more time to see if it produces anything. By the way, those that are quick at math, what's 70 minus 32? Literally, 70 minus 32. 38. The destruction of Jerusalem took place in 70 AD. Jesus was crucified in and around 32 AD. That leaves the number 38 years. They had 38 years from asking this question before they were destroyed. It was 1 generation left. Some of the people asking this question didn't answer it correct, and it cost them their lives. Now, 38 should ring true to you as well. We often round it to 40 when the children of Israel wandered around the wilderness. But if you go to Numbers and you go to Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 14, it tells you that it wasn't actually 40. You round that number up. The actual number, guess how many years it was? 38. The first time they came up, they failed the test. Then they wandered around the wilderness for 38 years, and then they came back and then they took it. Unfortunately, this time, 38 years later, Rome comes through and kills them all indiscriminately because they missed the time of Jesus coming. They weren't ready. I want to wrap this up, and I want to go back to pull our application out from the end of chapter 12 really quickly. We'll start in verse 54. Then Jesus told the crowds, "When you see a cloud coming in from the west, you immediately say there's going to be a storm, and that's what happens. When you see a south wind blowing, you say that it's going to be hot, and so it is. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky, yet you don't know how to interpret the present time. Why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? For example," and this is what I want us to get. "For example, when you go in with your opponent in front of a ruler, you do your best to settle with him on the way there. Otherwise, you will be dragged in front of the judge, and the judge will hand you over to the officer, and the officer will throw you into prison. And I tell you, you will never get out of there until you pay back the last penny." Jesus' point to that discussion is all of us are destined to stand before God on a day of judgment. And for all of us, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and our sin is a debt that we can never repay. And if Jesus' words would be true, we will go before the judge. He will throw us into prison of hell, and we'll never be able to pay him back because it's a debt that's too expensive to pay. But Jesus' point here is what? If you're on your way to the courthouse, do everything you can to settle outside of court. Don't wait until you get in before the judge and then try to do your work. No, take care of it before you get there. Jesus gives us such a beautiful mental image. So I want you to imagine with me, okay? You individually, but us corporately, we're walking down the street. We've just got out of the preliminary courtroom where the judge tells us that he will set a date and we will be condemned. We realize as we're walking outside the court that we have no hope of ever paying back that debt. It's too great a payment. And that when that court date is set, we will go before the judge and we will be thrown into prison or hell eternally. But just as we're thinking about that, as we're walking away from the courthouse, up comes Jesus. And Jesus says, "Listen, I heard about your case, and I want to take your case. I want to be your lawyer. And I promise, if you trust me, when we get to the court date, you will be acquitted. Your case will be dismissed, but you have to trust me." Well, without any other recourse, we accept Jesus' offer. So the court date comes. We walk into the courtroom. Jesus by our side, sitting at the desk. Picture an old Matlock show. We're sitting there next to Jesus and we're waiting for the judge to show up into the room to see what's going to happen, to see if Jesus' words are true. But before the judge comes through the side door, Jesus stands up in front of everyone and he takes his suit coat off and he lays it down. And he takes his shirt off and lays it down, revealing a body that has been scarred and broken. Not broken, excuse me. Scarred and speared. And he walks up, and as he walks up, all of the eyes of the courtroom are on him. Everyone sees the Mars. As he walks up to the judge's bench, he picks up the judge's robes and he puts it on himself. He hits the gavel on the table and says, "Your case is dismissed because I paid for your sin." Jesus says, if you know you're going to the judge, settle outside a court. Let me be your lawyer and choose me, because I've already paid for it. I've already taken the punishment that you deserve on myself. This last weekend, as I mentioned earlier, my sister-in-law's mom wasn't feeling well, having stomach issues. She went inside the hospital and she passed away yesterday. And it wasn't even in there a week. Had an infection that they couldn't take care of. It reminded me a lot of what happened to Tommy. I was talking to somebody else that was inside my family this week, and they think that it might be something wrong with the liver or liver failure. And if that's the case, the time would be very short because there's nothing they would be able to do. Not much hope of fixing it. Corporately, as a nation, we look around and we realize there's storm clouds on the horizon. We know a storm's coming. We know that there will have to be punishment to a nation that has gone so awry from its foundations. Whatever does come, we don't know when it's going to get here, but when it does get here, it's going to make the Great Depression look like we dropped our ice cream on a sunny day. We know it's coming. We can see it in the clouds. But the question of when it comes or how bad it is, the question of what we're going through right now or what sickness we're in, all of those questions pale in comparison to the question that Jesus asked. Are you ready when they get here? Jesus said, anyone who comes to me, I will by no means cast out. He said, anyone. You know what that means? If Judas would have come back to Jesus, his entrails wouldn't have been all over the side of the mountain. If Peter would have come, oh, he did, guess what? And he was forgiven. He was reinstated. Anyone includes you and me, from the worst to the best, from the oldest to the youngest, to the greatest to the least. Anyone is you and me, and if we come to him, we are included in the anyone. He says, I will by no means cast you away. The thief on the cross, the most worthless individual in all of the pages of the Bible. He could literally offer Jesus nothing. But when he said, would you remember me when you go into your kingdom? Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. Anyone. I pray that you would be counted in that anyone. And if you don't know that you are, you can right now. He will accept you if you pray to him. He won't cast you away. From your greatest sin to your least, he'll cover them all. He has already paid for every single thing you've ever done. So just let him be your lawyer. Let's pray. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.